From the day I was born, I understood my place in the family, invisible. My parents' eyes always seemed to sparkle a little brighter when they looked at him. My older brother, the golden child. Every misstep he made was forgiven, every minor success exaggerated into triumph. Meanwhile, my own achievements were greeted with polite nods, or worse, complete indifference. I remember my first piano recital. I had practiced for months, my fingers raw and sore from relentless drills. On the day of the recital, I poured my soul into every note, each one trembling with emotion. Afterwards, my parents clapped, but it was the polite kind of applause, the one that says, "Good job, but we're still waiting for something remarkable." 2 weeks later, my brother forgot to return a library book, and my father flew into a protective rage on his behalf, paying the fines immediately and praising his responsible nature. That was the day I first realized that fairness didn't exist in our home. It never had. Birthdays, holidays, even family dinners were arenas of silent comparison. My brother's laughter was always louder, his opinions always more valued, his dreams always more important. I became an expert at shrinking myself, at whispering my needs and hiding my disappointments. I learned to watch him from the shadows, cataloging his triumphs and failures alike, storing them like tiny seeds in my heart. Each one waited quietly for the day they might bloom into something more. At school, I excelled. I earned awards, accolades, and the quiet admiration of teachers and classmates. Yet at home, it never mattered. My parents' pride was a currency they spent exclusively on him. Even when I shared my successes, their questions were always filtered through him. Did your brother win anything this week? Are you sure he isn't better at this than you? They had built him a pedestal so high that no one, not even I, could reach it, and every gesture of recognition they gave me seemed like a cruel reminder of his superiority. Still, beneath the frustration and heartbreak, a spark flickered. I began to notice the cracks in his golden facade, his arrogance, his recklessness, his ignorance. I realized that while the world saw a flawless star, there were vulnerabilities hidden beneath the polish. And for the first time, a strange feeling emerged alongside the resentment. Hope, maybe, just maybe, I didn't need their approval to matter. Maybe one day they would finally see me, not as the shadow of my brother, but as someone who could not be ignored. And with that thought, a quiet determination settled in my chest, mingling with the years of pain and neglect. The invisible child was watching, the invisible child was learning, and the invisible child was beginning to plan. The breaking point didn't come with a dramatic argument or a shouting match. It came in quiet, almost invisible cruelty. It was the day I finally thought I could rise, that maybe my efforts would be recognized. I had spent months preparing for the school's art competition, pouring every ounce of creativity and emotion into a painting that spoke of pain, longing, and hope. When I unveiled it, my heart beat with anticipation, ready for approval or even acknowledgement. My brother walked by, smirking. "Looks like a kindergartner did this," he said casually, kicking my easel so the painting nearly toppled. I froze stunned, my cheeks burned, a mixture of embarrassment and fury. But worse was my parents' reaction. My mother sighed, glancing at him as though he were the injured party. "Be careful, he's been working so hard," she said, shaking her head at me. My father nodded solemnly. "You should be more careful, don't provoke him." I wanted to scream. I wanted to vanish into the floorboards and pull the world down with me. But instead, I smiled tightly, nodded, and walked away, swallowing the bitterness that bubbled like acid in my chest. That moment crystallized everything I had always known. In this house, my worth was measured by how much I deferred to him. And yet, a quiet ember ignited inside me. Not anger that consumed me blindly, but a cold, deliberate realization that the scales had been tipping for too long. For weeks after, I watched him carefully, noticing the patterns my parents ignored. His arrogance was a mask. His carelessness left cracks in his otherwise perfect facade. He spent recklessly, assuming my parents would pay for his debts. He boasted about achievements that were half-truths, and he reveled in attention he didn't truly earn. Each misstep was an opportunity, each boast a vulnerability waiting to be exposed. It wasn't malice that fueled me, It was clarity. I realized I could no longer wait for recognition or fairness. I could no longer depend on the world, or even my own family, to see me. If I wanted to matter, if I wanted them to finally acknowledge me, I would have to act quietly, deliberately, strategically. That night I lay in bed and pictured the future, a life where my brother's arrogance was humbled, where my parents could no longer ignore me, where I finally claimed the dignity that had been stolen for years. The ember of resentment had grown into a steady flame. I didn't know exactly how I would do it, but I knew I would. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt powerful not because I was adored or forgiven, but because I was awake. The invisible child had stopped hiding. The invisible child had begun to plan, and this plan would not fail. After the breaking point, I stopped waiting for life to notice me. I began to act, quietly and deliberately. There was no dramatic declaration, no shouting confrontation, just careful observation and strategic moves. I learned everything I could about my brother's habits, his weaknesses, and the blind spots my parents so eagerly ignored. Every debt he racked up, every careless boast, every arrogant misstep became a thread I could tug at, a tool I could use when the time was right. At first, my actions were small and almost invisible, like whispers in the wind. I excelled at school and work with precision, never announcing my victories, but letting them accumulate. Scholarships arrived, compliments from teachers and mentors reached my ears, and slowly I built a network of recognition outside the suffocating walls of my home. And like my brother who demanded attention, I allowed success to speak for itself. It was quiet, unassuming, and infinitely more satisfying. I also studied him closely, learning how he relied on my parents' indulgence for every failure and frivolous desire. He had never faced real consequences, every mistake was papered over, every flaw excused. And yet, there were cracks, moments when arrogance led him to overestimate his charm, when he bragged without evidence, when he trusted people who only pretended to admire him. I began planting seeds subtly, allowing his missteps to grow unnoticed until they could no longer be hidden. Even more than strategy, I focused on my own growth. I honed skills he had ignored or dismissed, cultivated relationships he thought unimportant, and built a life that was independent of his shadow. Each new accomplishment made me feel less like the invisible child, and more like a storm quietly gathering strength. My heart swelled with anticipation, not of cruelty, but of justice. The justice of finally being seen, finally mattering, finally proving that worth is not inherited or handed out like coins, earned and nurtured. And yet, there were nights when I doubted myself, when the weight of years of neglect pressed down, tempting me to give in to bitterness. But then, I would remember the moments of dismissal, the casual favoritism, the crushing sense of invisibility. Those memories fueled me. I realized that revenge was not about destroying him. It was about reclaiming my place, asserting my presence, and making my family see me for who I truly was. I began to smile more often, quietly, to let my confidence seep into the corners of every interaction. My brother remained oblivious, arrogant, and self-assured, unaware that the invisible child he had mocked and ignored was no longer powerless. The time would come when all his careless pride would meet its reckoning, and when it did, I would be ready not just for victory, but for the sweet, undeniable truth that I had finally become impossible to overlook. The plan was in motion. The invisible child was no longer invisible. The moment finally arrived with the quiet inevitability of a storm. Years of careful observation, subtle maneuvering, and silent achievement had prepared me for this day. My brother, as always, strutted through life assuming his golden halo was untouchable, but the invisible child, the one who had endured neglect, dismissal, and invisible scars, was no longer hiding. It began with small exposures. I let his careless boasts slip into the ears of those who mattered. His debts, once brushed aside by my parents, became visible through quiet financial oversight I had learned to manage. Friends and colleagues began noticing inconsistencies in his stories, moments of arrogance that bordered on foolishness. Each revelation, though small, chipped away at the pedestal on which he had perched for so long. The real moment of triumph came at a family gathering, a dinner where my parents, as usual, expected to celebrate his achievements. I arrived not with resentment but with confidence. My presence alone shifted the atmosphere. There was a subtle tension in the air, a sense that something had changed. I spoke calmly and deliberately about my own accomplishments, letting the facts speak without exaggeration. The room grew silent, a rare stillness in which my parents could no longer ignore me. My brother tried his usual charm, his smirks and interruptions, but they fell flat. Each boast he made was met with quiet counterpoints, facts he could not refute, and a poise he had never learned to anticipate. For the first time, the golden child was unsteady, exposed before the very people who had always shielded him. I watched as the realization dawned in his eyes, the same mixture of disbelief and humiliation that only comes when one's assumed invincibility is shattered. But my revenge was not cruel, it was precise, measured, and honest. I did not humiliate him for fun. I revealed truth, and in doing so, demanded acknowledgement. My parents, finally seeing the results of years of neglect, looked at me with eyes widened, a mixture of pride and guilt. There was no need for apologies, only recognition of the truth. I had grown, succeeded, and become someone impossible to ignore. And in that moment, the years of pain and invisibility lifted from my shoulders. Triumph was sweet, yes, but more than that, it was freeing. I realized that the greatest revenge is not vengeance alone. It is self-realization, confidence, and dignity. My brother would recover, perhaps even prosper again, but he would never forget that the child he dismissed had risen, unbowed and unstoppable. I smiled quietly, a warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with cruelty and everything to do with justice. The invisible child had been seen. The invisible child had finally won, and in that victory I found peace.